Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. With Tennessee's loss, and again, I'm not criticizing Tennessee, it does certainly make the SEC and the SEC standings as we stand, about as crazy and chaotic as they could possibly get. And so I want to switch gears from the game itself to what the heck do we do with the SEC standings and what does it mean for the college football playoff picture? I think we're trending towards 4 SEC teams getting in, 3 at-large bids, probably 3 at-large bids from the Big Ten. Notre Dame, if they win out, will be in. And so you have a chaotic situation where good teams are going to be left out. And with Tennessee's loss, it crystallizes that this thing is going to be crazy down the final few weeks. For people who have not seen the standings, by the way, producer Matt, just because of scheduling, we couldn't get him to do this segment with me. So if you're watching on YouTube, I apologize that we don't have the visuals to kind of give you what the SEC standings look like at this point. But here's what you need to know. Going into week 13, going into the final 2 weeks of the regular season, there are 2 teams tied atop the SEC standings, Texas and Texas A&M. That is right. Texas and Texas A&M both at 5-1, both with 2 league games left. But what's obviously noteworthy there, those 2 teams play each other the final week of the regular season. One of them is guaranteed to take a second loss. And if they both win this weekend, the winner of that is guaranteed to go to the SEC championship game in Atlanta. But what I really want to do, we'll get back to Texas and Texas A&M in a minute. I want to talk about second place in the league standings because right now there is a 4-way tie with 2 losses in the loss column in the SEC. Georgia with the win actually has finished their SEC slate at 6-2 overall in league play. Tennessee, 1 SEC game left. They're 5-2. They play at Vandy to close the regular season. Alabama 4-2. They have Oklahoma at Oklahoma this weekend, Auburn to close the regular season. And then finally, Ole Miss has at Florida this weekend, Mississippi State to close the regular season. And so this is the big conversation in college football right now is how do you rank these 2 loss teams in the SEC? What does it mean for the college football playoff picture? And is there a chance that good teams are going to be left out? And so what I want to do is dive in, share my thoughts on where things stand and where I think they could go. And what I really want to do, by the way, is focus on those 2 lost teams, okay? Texas and Texas A&M we'll get to at the end. I'll tell you this, I think either one losing that final game of the regular season, it is going to be hard to make the argument that they deserve to be in the college football playoff. But as I said, let's focus on those 4 teams, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss, all with 2 league losses. Everyone ranging from no league games left to 2 league games left. Let's go ahead and dive in. And when I look at these 4 teams, what stands out to me, they all have strengths and their weakness on their resume. They all have weaknesses on their resume. And I think what I just look at point blank and transparently, I think it's what the committee is going to look at as well, is basically who are your best wins, who are your worst losses, and what does it mean in the grand scheme of things? And so when I look at this team, when I look at this group, I got to give credit where it's due. Georgia, I've been a little bit down on them. I've been critical of Carson Beck, as I just mentioned a minute ago. But right now, if you're ranking those 2 lost teams, I think Georgia has to be atop that group. And I know that's tough for an Ole Miss fan to hear a week after one of the best wins in program history. But if we're looking at great wins and the losses, how do they stack up? I think Georgia's got the most impressive resume. Sitting at 8-2 right now, they have probably the best win in all of college football with that win at Texas. They also beat Tennessee. That's obviously a great win. And I think it's worth noting with Georgia, I don't know that it will come down to this, but played a good Clemson team in the out of conference. If you're a Georgia fan, you want Clemson to keep winning. You want Georgia to beat South Carolina. You want Georgia to get to, or you want Clemson to beat South Carolina. You want Clemson to get to the ACC championship game. You want Clemson to win the ACC because the more they win, I don't know that it's going to be an X factor, but it can only It can only help your resume. I'm tripping over my words here. Let's get Torres focused and back on track. Okay. So Georgia has 2 great wins and their losses are good too. At Alabama, by the way, they led in the 4th quarter. So there's that. and then at Ole Miss. Not going to say anything other than that's a good loss. Ole Miss is a great football team right now. And so if you're ranking these 2-loss teams, I don't think there's any doubt that Georgia has the best resume of them. I hate to say it. I think that Ole Miss coming off again, the best win that they've had in years in that program, they probably have the toughest road ahead in terms of convincing the committee that they deserve to be in. Because yes, they have a great win over Georgia. I'm not taking it away. And one of the reasons we all liked Ole Miss is because they had some nice schedule breaks throughout the season. They don't play Tennessee. They don't play Texas. They don't play Alabama. And so they've been able to pick up win after win after win. What's also worth noting, Ole Miss has by far the worst loss out of all of these teams that we're talking about. Sorry, Kentucky fans, cover your ears. I hate to say it, but losing to Kentucky at home is the worst loss that any of these teams have. Listen, I'm not going to criticize Ole Miss for losing at LSU, but that was such a winnable game. If Ole Miss doesn't make the playoff, you just got to think back to that game of like, darn, man. Like we had them dead to rights in Baton Rouge, and we could not pull out the victory. And so I hate to say it, Ole Miss fans. And by the way, there's still a lot of season left. I'm not saying Ole Miss is going to be left out of the playoff, but it's just hard to justify saying that they definitively deserve to be in when you look at everybody else's resume. I think beyond Georgia and Ole Miss, the Tennessee-Alabama conversation is interesting. Tennessee and Alabama obviously both have one great win apiece. Alabama beat Georgia at home. Tennessee, by the way, has the head-to-head win over Alabama. And I think their losses are pretty comparable, right? Alabama loses at Tennessee. There's no shame in that. And then kind of a weird loss at Vandy. Tennessee loses to Georgia. No shame in that at Georgia. And, of course, the weird loss at Arkansas. And so to me, I do think that if I was power ranking those teams, I'd have to put Tennessee at number 2 because they do have the head-to-head win. I do think the head-to-head win should matter in that case. Now, I don't think it should matter all the time. And I know Ole Miss fans are like, dude, Torres, we just beat Georgia 2 weeks ago. What are you talking about? Head-to-head matters. But I think when you compare resumes, Georgia has the best resume. I think Alabama and Tennessee's resumes are comparable. And so then it comes down to, do they have the head-to-head? Tennessee has the advantage. And then Ole Miss, I would say, is in 4th place there. But I would say a couple interesting things to just consider here as we talk about all these teams. One, I will say, the SEC sort of got a little bit of help on Saturday night. BYU late at night took a loss at home to Kansas. Why that's noteworthy, BYU now really probably won't have the resume to get an at-large bid if they were to lose in the Big 12 championship game. Now, they have a tough schedule. They play at Arizona State, who's all of a sudden 8-2 this weekend. But I only bring it up because when you look at BYU, I think their loss basically eliminates the Big 12 from getting any sort of at-large candidate into the college football playoff. If BYU were to lose that conference championship game, everybody in that league is going to have at least 2 losses. I think it's hard to argue that a 2-loss BYU that hasn't won its conference has a better resume than a 2-loss Tennessee, a 2-loss Alabama, whatever. So I think that's good. I also think the SEC, you know what's crazy? I was thinking about this. You know who the SEC should actually be rooting for? One, support the troops, because Army beating Notre Dame is great for another SEC team getting in. But you know what it really might come down to? How about this? Lincoln Riley and USC. Lincoln Riley and USC, think about this. The man that they call Tebow, the B word out west, okay? That's what he got called when he left Oklahoma. He's afraid of the SEC. Well, if USC beats Notre Dame, I think Notre Dame's out of the playoff picture, so you need to be rooting for Lincoln Riley. A couple other thoughts as we kind of get into this. I mentioned I would talk about Texas and Texas A&M at the end of this segment. I think it's worth noting. First of all, they both have an SEC game this weekend. Texas A&M at Auburn, Texas at home against Kentucky. You'd think both of them would win those games. But what I would say, whoever loses that Texas A&M game, I think immediately falls behind those 4 teams I mentioned, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and Ole Miss. A&M, if they were to lose at home, they would have 3 losses. So they would, in the loss column, be behind everybody. And on top of that, it's worth noting 2 of those losses came at home, Notre Dame and Texas. That wouldn't be terrible losses, but it's worth noting. You have 2 home losses. Nobody else in the conversation except Ole Miss has even lost at home. And Texas, I think this is interesting with Texas. I don't think enough people have considered this. If Texas were to lose to Texas A&M and they finished 10-2, they would have by far the worst resume out of all those 10-2 teams. So if you throw them in with Georgia, Bama, Ole Miss, and Tennessee, guess what? Texas has the worst resume by far out of all of them. Their best win at that point would probably be against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's 6-4, so they could be a 7-5. Is a win over Vanderbilt a resume booster? And so Texas, to me, has looked like the best team all season long, but they won't have much ground to stand on. Lose to Georgia, lose to Texas A&M. You don't have Alabama. You don't have LSU. You don't have Tennessee. You don't have Ole Miss on the schedule. So I could go on, but I just think it's interesting and worth monitoring. The team that loses that game, I think, would be eliminated. And then lastly, one other thing, because I know we're going long on this segment. I'm still curious what the committee does if a 2-loss team loses in the SEC championship game. In other words, let's say Texas beats A&M, they finish 11-1, they win the SEC championship game as well, and a Georgia or a Bama or a Tennessee takes a 3rd loss in the SEC championship game. Don't think they would be punished for playing that extra game, but you just never know. You just never know, so it's all worth considering. But again, I'll try to spare everybody some time here because I got to get to some other stuff, talk about some other stuff. But that final few weeks of the SEC is going to be fascinating. And what the committee decides to do with those 2-loss teams, I am intrigued to find out.